Tell me about Wendi and the divorce and how that shook out.
Yeah. It was a pretty bitter divorce.
One of the interesting things in the trial of State of Florida versus Charles Adelson regarding the defense strategy was the fact that defense attorney Dan Markel seemed to try to impose on the state of Florida the fact that they're presenting this case, that their theory is that Wendi Adelson was involved in the murder of Dan Markel. Wendi Adelson, of course, being the ex-wife of Dan Markel, the victim. Now, if we go back and look at every single trial involving the murder of Dan Markel, at every trial, the state of Florida, through the prosecution, Georgia Cappleman primarily, they did enter into evidence, a lot of testimony, a lot of evidence that seems to be suggestive of Wendi Adelson's involvement. That included the whole thing about her trip to the crime scene. That included the whole issue of her trying to set up Professor Lacasse, or the Adelsons trying to set up Professor Lacasse. There's a lot of testimony. The buying the Bouillette drink within an hour of the murder of Dan Markel. Many different pieces of testimony were introduced into evidence that seemed to suggest that Wendi Adelson was involved or had knowledge of the murder, but they always were entering the evidence but not directly arguing that she was involved. They wanted to prove that the Adelsons were involved, but they never argued Wendi was involved. In fact, they used her as a witness, and if you look at the most recent search warrant affidavit in the case, they actually indicate that Wendi Adelson was cooperative in her interrogation that happened, or police interview that happened within a couple of hours of the murder, or at least of the shooting. Now, the defense in the trial against Charles Adelson took this strategy of, the state of Florida thinks that Wendy's involved. They tried to put that before the jury, that this is part of the state's theory, and then they tried to break down and show how wrong it is. And to me, it was a silly effort in a sense. For example, in the cross-examination of Wendi Adelson, Dan Markel just kept pounding upon all the plans that Wendi Adelson had for after the murder that were supposed to be happening in Tallahassee, and used that to argue to the jurors, look, this woman had all these plans, so obviously she wasn't involved. I mean, it was a silly argument, but that was the strategy that the defense took, that the state was trying to suggest that Wendi Adelson was involved, but that there was all this other evidence that she was not involved, including the fact that she was making plans, that she was setting up dates in Tallahassee in the weeks coming up, that she was going to be hiring somebody in the following weeks or months, that she had bought an airplane ticket to travel out of the country, leaving out of Tallahassee, or to travel to a wedding or something like that from Tallahassee. And of course, I'm not sure if those tickets were changeable or refundable. But anyway, that was the kind of evidence that he tried to get through cross-examination of Wendi to suggest that she was not acting as if she knew that something was going to happen to Dan Markel. Now, of course, if you use that logic and you turn it upside down, and then you look at all the things that she did that seem to suggest that she knew that something was about to happen to Dan Markel, then maybe you can say, well, this, using the same logic, then there's actual evidence that points to Wendi being involved, or having at least at a minimum knowledge about the murder. And those pieces of evidence are mostly known by you, and I have discussed them, for example, in my top 20 reasons why I thought Wendi Adelson was involved. That includes avoiding Dan Markel in the days leading up to the murder, avoiding him in the sense of not talking to him and not meeting him in person during a couple of weeks before the murder, except on the day of the murder. Then she's trying to make these arrangements with him to meet him, and that gives her an excuse to find out what's going on with him. What is he doing? If you go back some more time, the whole cancellation of her deposition, the cancellation of the hearing where the decisions were going to be made about the motions that were filed by both parties in the post-divorce litigation. So all of that was avoided, and she avoided being deposed before the murder because her attorney withdrew, then everything was canceled. And so that seems to point towards her involvement, right? So here we cancel all this stuff. I don't want to be deposed again. That's the logic that I would say on the flip side, right? So she gets all this stuff canceled, then is killed, and then now she doesn't have to be deposed, and she doesn't have to have a hearing on whether there should be a limited contact between Donna and the children or any of the allegations that she committed fraud in the court and all that stuff. The visit to the crime scene, the fact that she decided to purchase bullet, bourbon, or whiskey just after the murder, even if someone else decided that they wanted to have this drink for their stock the bar party, and maybe she didn't pick the bullet, but she also bought it right after the murder. The fact that she was wearing the owl shirt, of course, the state never even introduced that, but Georgia Kaplan has said in an interview that she's aware of the fact that there's some meaning behind the owl connected to death, and that may or may not have been a pure coincidence, right? The timing of the breakup with Professor Lacasse, the fact that she met with Katherine Magbanua, one of the convicted co-conspirators in the days before the murder, the fact that she was talking to her children about death for the first time ever, just a couple of days before the murder, the fact that she had lunch with two child psychiatrists, or one at least was a child psychiatrist, on the day of the murder, and probably was discussing the fact that that the boys first raised the whole topic of death. Supposedly they raised it, maybe she raised it, who knows, a couple of days before the murder. So those are the pieces of evidence that all of you know about. There's one more that you guys are not aware about because it wasn't discussed in my top 20 reasons video, and it wasn't ever presented at trial. But I have an interview of a mutual friend. Her name is Ryan, and she was a mutual friend of Dan Markel and Wendi Adelson. And she was interviewed by the police right after the murder with fresh memories. And what she thought was kind of interesting is actually something that could be used with the same logic that Dan Rashbaum used to try to disprove Wendi Adelson's involvement in the murder. It can be used to try to show her involvement or her knowledge that the murder was coming and that she was going to be moving to South Florida. So in that interview, as you'll see shortly, Ryan Cox talks about an event that happened a day or two before the murder that is suggestive of the fact that Wendi Adelson was cleaning out the closet of the boys, and therefore maybe was doing so because she knew that she was about to move out of Tallahassee. And why would she know that? Perhaps because then she was involved or knew about the upcoming, attempted at least, obviously there was no guarantee of success, but she either knew or was involved in the plan to kill Dan Markel. That would be the counter argument, right? So if Dan Rashbaum thinks that the fact that she made plans proves that she wasn't involved, then maybe we can argue, and at least certainly a prosecutor will try to argue from all these pieces of evidence, including this one, including Ryan, who's I think a key witness if Wendi is ever charged, that she was taking actions that seem to implicate her in the case. So, look, I'm aware that the logic of Dan Rashbaum, I thought it was a silly argument, but I understand that it is possible that she was not involved, and sure, making all those plans are suggestive of someone who is not involved. But then again, you have to think about it this way. Obviously, if she was involved, and she's a very smart woman, she would not have canceled all her plans. She would have acted as if her plan was to stay in Tallahassee. That's why I thought it was a silly argument, because we're talking about a person who's smart, who's a lawyer, well-educated, who obviously wrote a book, was an attorney on several areas of the law, later became a clerk for a judge. She's smart enough that if she's involved in a plot to kill her ex-husband, she's not gonna cancel all her plans and make it so obvious at least that she was involved. Anyway, what I would say is that then all those little things that are maybe less, all those little things that happen that are suggested by the state of Florida as evidence of her potential knowledge of her involvement, or that I have talked about, they're not as obvious, right? So maybe the driving to the scene is kind of obvious, but she had an excuse. So, difficult case against Wendi Adelson because it is not a clear-cut case. But I wanted to add one more piece of evidence to the discussion, one that hasn't been discussed openly. I did publish the video a long time ago as a members-only gift, but I'm publishing this more limited section now for everybody. So here we go. Ryan's words just very shortly after the murder of Dan Markel. Thanks for watching Mentor Lawyer.
All right. I'm Investigator Cherry. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Obviously, what we're doing is we're just getting a lot of information, as much information we can, to try to narrow a focus of where the investigation needs to go. So, it's similar to the movies as far as we got to dive in the victim's life, and we have to learn about Daniel as fast as we can.
Right.
Okay. So, this is basically you promising to tell the truth.
Yeah.
All right. I'm Investigator Cherry. I am conducting an official investigation as at this point as an attempted murder.
Okay.
Okay. Any false statements about material matters given by a witness under oath will constitute perjury, which is a first-degree misdemeanor according to Section 837 Florida statutes. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you are about to give me is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Do you understand that if you knowingly make material misstatements of fact to me during this investigation, you will have committed the crime of perjury?
Yes.
All right, Ryan, if you would just sign that. Okay. How do you know Daniel?
I know Daniel from law school. So I met him, I was still a law student when he moved down from when he was teaching up in New York, when he was engaged to Wendi. And I met both of them around the same time. Wendi had been friends, had gone to high school and college and also law school for part of the time with a good friend of mine in South Florida. So we met each other in the law school and started talking about South Florida. And kind of became, I guess, quick friends then. And then I started to get to know Dan. I didn't know them very well in law school, but they're also members of my temple. So I would see them when I came back up. I was a public defender down in Broward, and he would teach criminal law. So he talked to me a few times about coming and talking to his class about, I guess, what it was like to practice post law school. And then when I moved back, we talked a lot about getting together. And then him and I became close once I found out that they were divorced. I kind of reached out to him in terms of ways to raise my son Jewish. I'm in an interfaith marriage, so I kind of reached out to him in terms of getting some tips on how to do it on my own, and we started doing Shabbat dinners together and things like that. Just kind of became close after that. And that would be in the last year.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Are you a lawyer now?
Yeah.
Where at?
I practice at the legislature. I do policy now, so
Okay.
I don't do trial work anymore.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. When was the last time you saw Daniel?
Last Sunday at the park. At Ventura Park, yeah.
Okay. What were you guys just hanging out or
Play date,
play
yeah.
date with the kids?
He had just gotten back in town from New York and sent a bunch of us of the creative families a message, and there was a bunch of us there, actually.
Creative, you mean in
The preschool.
preschool?
Yeah. My son also goes there. So there was probably about, I would say, 6 creative families there.
When was the last time you talked to him?
That was the last time.
That was?
Yeah.
No communications via Facebook or?
I can check. I feel like that he had messaged about what he wanted to do for the boy's birthday, but I feel like that was before last Sunday, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
But I can check.
Yeah, if you don't mind,
No,
actually,
no.
obviously we have ways to, obviously we can do Facebook stuff, but sometimes when you're actually friends and stuff, you have a little bit more information
Right.
on that page. I wouldn't mind taking a look.
It was, he messaged later that afternoon about going to Truesdale
That's
with
Sunday.
the kids, yeah. And I was cooking dinner for my stepdad, so I didn't end up going. But, and then he had messaged, yeah, the other time was Saturday, so he was talking about doing Truesdale or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, he was.
Can you
looking for-
pull up his Facebook?
And I don't have a lot of battery. I tried to charge when I came up here, but.
You visited California last week? So says
I
Facebook.
guess, right? We definitely, we would see each other a lot at the park. We did a lot of play dates at the park. We did some Shabbat dinners together. We did synagogue stuff together, but there was not a lot of.
This Prof's blog.
Yes.
What is that?
That is, he started that blog. He
Mhm.
writes articles for that blog. And my understanding, I've actually never been on there. There's a lot of professors that do criminal law that all kind of contribute on the blog. So.
You wouldn't happen to know the passcode on his phone or iPad?
No. That's New York.
No, no.
Oh, I think it's Play-Doh.
Play-Doh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Has he been unusually stressed in the last week or so about anything particular?
Not that I'm aware of, but like I said, there was a lot of people at the park. I was only there for about an hour, and we didn't get a lot of one-on-one time. The only downside to doing play dates like that is that you're running around with your kids, and so
right.
My kid likes to run around a lot by himself, so I wasn't really talking with a lot of people, and I definitely didn't get to talk to him much one-on-one, unfortunately.
Tell me about Wendi and the divorce and how that shook out.
Yeah, it was a pretty bitter divorce. I mean, I will be honest, I have never heard her side. Her and I have not had any one-on-one time since the divorce happened, so I know what he told me of his side. It was, my understanding was that pretty much just one day she filed and changed the locks and kind of, from his statements, it was not really expected. And then I think it was about, I'm trying to remember the timing, September, I think was when she moved out, and they finalized it on August. So almost a year.
Okay.
And they were just about to go to trial, I know, when it settled. He never told me any financial, any stuff like that. I mean, the only stuff he kind of talked to me about was she wouldn't let him Skype and things like that when she had the boys and things like that. But I mean, I know that it did shock him, and he.
So it was like a sudden change of heart, according to him.
Yeah. And like I said, I have never talked to Wendi about it. Him and I, we would talk, but a lot of times, again, we were having dinner with the boys, and I tried to not talk too much when they're there, especially because it was they had been living separately for about a year at that point, but it was still pretty new. I do know in the last 6 months he had started dating someone up in New York, and that seemed to be very positive in his life. I also know Wendi.
You saw a difference?
Yeah. I mean, he was never, he was depressed, and he had a difficult time with it. And when I say depressed, I mean, it was just dealing with the change. Never, ever would have done anything. I mean, he loved those boys beyond all belief. So it was never, he definitely put his game face on, and really loved every minute that he had the boys. And missed them terribly when he was gone. And so I think that was his hardest thing to adjust to, was being away from them. But I think there was just, I guess, hope again kind of started to set in. I really only talked to him once about her.
The girl in New York?
The girl in New York, yeah. And he went up there a lot. He was teaching up there. He was doing I don't want to say a seminar, but he was doing a class where he'd go up once a month and do a seminar or something like that. And he met her through that, and then would see her I guess once a month he would see her when he went up there. And I think she was coming down here some as well. I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like she was. I also know Wendy's dating someone because she brought him to my son's birthday party at the park. I don't remember, I kind of remember what he looks like, but I don't remember his name or anything like that.
What did it look like? How long ago was it?
That was May 21st, I want to say. It was the middle of the week. I don't know if there's date information on it. Actually, if I go to these, I'm pretty sure it was May 21st. Yeah, May 21st.
What did he look like?
He was tall, skinny. I'm sorry, he was definitely 5'8" to 6 foot. I'm short, so narrowing it down much, right? Exactly. Narrowing it down from that is a little difficult, but he was definitely lanky. Blonde hair, kind of, I don't want to say mohawk, but clean cut, but then hair kind of pull it up in the front, and then he wore glasses. I don't really remember what the frames look like. Pale complexion, and that's about all I remember. I went through, on the way over here, I went through my phone to see if he was in any of the pictures that were taken, and he's not. Okay. But I know she'd said they've been dating, I think she said she met him in October of last year. But aside from that, I don't know anything about him.
So he teaches at the law school?
Yeah, he teaches criminal law and criminal procedure.
How long has he been doing that?
He's been at this law school he came in 2006, I want to say, I think. But then he taught at Harvard before then. I think it was Harvard. I'm pretty sure he taught at Harvard before. Okay. He's been teaching, I would probably say, for 15 years, I believe. Maybe a little longer, but.
And how's his style? Is he well accepted? Is he
Mm-hmm.
abrasive or?
I never had him. I have heard from other people that he is kind of a hard-ass professor. But that's law school also, so, most...
So it's to be expected.
Right. I did hear he was more intense than some other ones, which did come as a surprise to me because he's not at all like that outside of school, so...
Did he ever complain about any kind of students or anything?
Not to me.
Not to you?
No.
Who,
No, but I mean...
Who do you think he would confide and stuff like that at?
I would say friends that he was professors that he was friends with.
Do you know anybody like that?
I don't. But I mean, I graduated in 2007, and I moved back to South Florida, and then I came back up later. So that was not really my world. I know that there are a couple other Markels, Dan Markels actually, who are also members of our temple. They teach different things. I don't know if he was close to them, but that's the only. I'm trying to think of other.
They weren't related?
Mm-mm.
Oh,
No,
that's interesting.
Really random, yeah. Especially that they all ended up at Florida State Law, and they're all members of Shamray Torah.
Did you ever hear him talk about firearms or owning a gun or anything like that?
No. We didn't really talk about that. I certainly don't remember him talking about that. But I don't know if that's just because he didn't or because it didn't ever come up.
Right.
I mean, it's not something I generally talk about. I don't know anyone or anything like that, so. Yeah. I mean, I know. Yeah, trust me, I wish I knew more. We had started to become close. Wendi and I have recently talked more often. My husband and I had separated for several months. And so her and I had started talking during that time. I reached out to her to try and get details on, their kids seemed pretty adjusted for having gone through that. So I reached out to her to try and get tips on how they handled that to make sure that, the kids were okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then we decided that Charlie would move back in to deal with some financial stuff. And so she said I could start coming over and staying at the house when she's out of town and things like that. So, I mean, there's been more conversation recently with us, but we haven't seen each other one-on-one. She came to my house yesterday to drop off some clothes that the boys had outgrown for my son, and brought me some soup because I had a bladder procedure yesterday. But that's the first time I've seen her since the party. And the party was the first time I had seen her since.
And the party back in May.
Yeah, in May. And that was the first time I'd seen her in.
So it's been really that's not callous, but it's been more about, the conversation been more about your situation than what's really going on with her.
Yeah. I mean, she had told me about the boyfriend. Her and I would talk a lot about getting together, and then we just didn't.
Something would happen.
Exactly.
My wife does that all the time.
Right.
I'm getting together with so-and-so, and it's like an hour till, and she's like, oh yeah, they canceled.
Right. Either I'm tired, or the kids are sick, or there's lots of that, especially at preschool.
Yeah.
So, and we just hadn't really had a chance to do that. We actually talked about it again, doing that next week, when she was over last night. But, and she messaged me this morning talking about the soup, and that was at 9 o'clock. So, but, just asking if it was okay.
I got it written down. What is your number? All right.
Yeah.
All right. We're kind of casting a really wide net, so it's hard for me to focus in and ask.
Right.
Make sure I ask the right questions.
I understand.
So,
feel free to call me.
Yeah. So, is there anything that, once you heard that something happened? I mean, did something jump out at you? Just says, "Oh, I really wonder about that one thing."
No. I mean, of course, everybody. Scott asked me if Wendi was stable, and and I did share with him, and Dan had told me during the divorce, or right after the divorce, that she had had some depression issues and some postpartum issues, and that they were talking about doing counseling, but that they never did that before she moved out, or changed the locks, whatever. But I mean, I saw her last night and she seemed fine. She was awkward, but that's because my husband was there and she didn't, I don't know if she realized that he was going to be there. And,
right.
Yeah.
Because of your situation.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
I didn't take that as her being awkward,
right,
because of her life. And I don't know how much of, obviously I don't want to share things, but I know I can reach out to people at the temple and find out much more of who he
Yeah, we'll
Talk to it and
we'll
stuff
talk
like that.
to we'll talk to anybody. I mean,
Okay.
one of these things, if you have information, I mean, it's and I've worked several cases that are similar in this nature where you're just really casting a wide net. Basically, it's oh, the police will find that out. No. Come make sure.
Yeah.
Because I'd rather have 10 people come here and tell me the same thing than that one person who I really need to talk to doesn't, assuming that we know about.
Right.
So.
There is a gentleman who I know he's close with. I don't know if he would have a better idea of who Dan would talk to at the school. And his wife works at the law library. But I mean, him and I were talking, and he's like, I really don't talk with Dan about anything personal. We kind of stay out of.
Did you guys ever talk? You and Dan ever talk about any kind of cases or anything that he was working on, or anything that he seemed passionate about, or anything like that?
No, but I mean anything criminal law. Well, any of that is.
Apparently, he was working on a case, or was concerned about something that had happened up in New York. I guess there's a case going on where rabbis were charged, like 4 rabbis were charged with like torturing husbands who were refusing to divorce in the Jewish faith or whatever. Okay. Are you familiar with any of that stuff?
Mm-mm. But that wouldn't surprise me that he would be involved in something like that.
How's that?
Yeah. I mean...
Just because of his...
the faith. I mean, he's very involved in the Jewish faith. Plus, he lived in New York, there's that's kind of the world of his crossing.
So it would be fascinating for his religious and
criminal
professional beliefs.
Yeah, but also with as much time as he's been spending up there, it wouldn't surprise me if
he's trying to get involved in
that, and then also if maybe one of his students up there, or maybe the woman he's been dating, who I'm 99% sure is also Jewish, knew some of these people, or it wouldn't surprise me if some of these, if there's a more personal connection. But that's kind of everything that definitely melds all of his passions into a case like that.
Can you pull up that Facebook thing again? I want to write down his blog thing.
Yeah, it's
I saw it earlier today, and I was like,
Prawfsblog. Prawfsblog.
Say it again.
AW. Hold on. Let me actually, let me just take my phone. And do you know the woman's name?
The girlfriend?
He's been dating up there?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right.
Do you?
I didn't, no. He just said he was dating a new girl, and
so Prawfsblog, now that I take a second, this is like the Boston slang professor's blog.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm so stupid.
No. You're not in
I read it earlier, and I was like, how to make a damn sense. I'll figure out later. Okay.
It probably was a
joke.
Prawfsblog with PROFSBLOG had already been taken or something like that, so we had to come up with some variation.
Changed a little bit. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
How's it looking? Can I not answer that?
Too early to tell.
Okay.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we got to keep a lot of stuff to ourselves and everything. So
I understand.
So people will probably ask you, just keep our conversation.
Yeah,
absolutely. To here for now.
Yeah, I understand.
But yeah, feel free to call me anytime.
I will.
I got your number, and yeah.
I wish I'd seen him more often recently.
That's okay.
On many levels. All right. Thanks. She came to my house yesterday to drop off some clothes that the boys had outgrown for my son, and brought me some soup because I had bladder procedure yesterday, but that's the first time I've seen her since the party. And the party was the first time I had seen her since.
And the party back in May.
Yeah, in May. And that was the first time I'd seen her in
So it's been
year.
really